Throughout NBA history, we've seen some pretty great rivalries in the playoffs. Lakers vs Celtics, 76ers vs Celtics, Pistons vs Bulls, or Warriors vs Cavs. But today, I want to look at some of the rivalries that don't often get talked about as much, so here are some of the more underrated ones, in my opinion. The Hawks vs the Celtics. As I'm currently making this video, the Celtics just defeated the Hawks in the first round of the 2023 playoffs. But some fans don't know that the two teams have had a long and underrated rivalry, starting with Bob Pettit and Bill Russell in the 1950s. The St. Louis Hawks actually drafted Russell second overall in the 1956 draft, but they traded him almost immediately to the Boston Celtics. The Hawks were a Western Division team at this point in history, so they got to face the Celtics in the 1957 finals, which the Celtics won in 7 games. They rematched the following season in the 1958 finals, which the Hawks won in 6 games, handing Bill Russell his only finals loss, although he did have to miss time for this series, so make of that what you will. Their third finals rematch came in 1960 and was once again pushed to 7 games. In one of the best games of his career, Bill Russell scored 22 points and grabbed 35 rebounds to win Game 7. The last Russell and Pettit finals was in 1961, but this time, the Celtics dismantled the Hawks in a comfortable 5 games. The Hawks relocated to Atlanta in 1968 and became a part of the East in 1970. The Celtics and Hawks had 2 playoff battles in 72 and 73, which the Celtics both won. It was actually in Game 1 of the 1973 East semis, where John Havlicek posted 54 points, the most ever by a Celtic in a playoff game. Let's fast forward to the 1980s, where the rivalry was rejuvenated thanks to Larry Bird and Dominique Wilkins. The teams faced off in 3 different playoff series. The first was in the 1983 first round, where the Celtics won 2-1. The second was in the 1986 East semis, the same year Bird and Wilkins finished as that season's finalists for the MVP award. The Celtics won that series comfortably in 5 games. The third and final meeting was in the 1988 East semis, and this one was definitely the coolest of the bunch. The series went to 7 games, with Atlanta running a deep 10-man rotation, but even in their old age, it was the Celtics' famous starting 5 that managed to hold on and win the series. The rivalry was revitalized in 2008, when the Boston assembled super team was unexpectedly taken to 7 games by the Joe Johnson, Josh Smith, and Al Horford-led Hawks in the first round, but ultimately the Celtics hung on and won in 7 games. These same teams met again in the 2012 first round, and the Celtics won again, this time in 6 games. The Hawks managed to finally get a playoff series win against the Celtics in 2016, when they defeated them in a 6-game first round series, their first series win over Boston since 1958. The Knicks vs the Bullets. When the Washington Wizards were still branded as the Baltimore and Capitol Bullets, they had some pretty heated matchups with the New York Knicks back in the day. They actually go back as far as the 1940s and 50s, facing each other in 1948, 49, and 53. New York won 2 of those matchups, while Baltimore won 1, but the rivalry really got good in 1969. With the emergence of Willis Reed, Walt Frazier, and Dave DeBusschere, the Knicks were becoming a real threat in the East in the late 60s. They met the Baltimore Bullets in the 1969 semis, which had that season's MVP, Wes Unseld, and all-stars like Earl Monroe, Gus Johnson, and Jack Marin. The Knicks swept the Bullets in 4 games, despite excellent performances from Monroe and Kevin Loughery. In 1970, the Knicks and the Bullets met again in the East semis. This time, the series went to an epic 7 games, but the Knicks once again came out on top. The Bullets did get their revenge the following season though, in the 1971 East Finals, defeating the Knicks in 7 games, which is even more impressive when you consider that Gus Johnson and Kevin Loughery had to miss serious time due to injury. Despite an appearance in the 1971 Finals, Earl Monroe was in a contract dispute with the Bullets, and as such, he was traded to the Knicks for the 71-72 season. In one of the most perfect matchups from a narrative standpoint, the Bullets and Knicks met up again in the 72 East Semis semis, but the firepower from Frazier and Monroe in the Knicks backcourt was just too much for the Bullets, who lost the series in 6 games. In 1973, the Bullets added some new guys of their own, like Elvin Hayes, Phil Chenier, and Kevin Porter, but again, they were beaten by the Knicks in the East semis, this time in 5 games. 1974 was the final playoff matchup between the Knicks and the Bullets. The series went to 7 games, and with Willis Reed missing extensive time, it looked like the Bullets would finally beat the Knicks again, but it was Earl Monroe who iced the series, scoring 30 points in Game 7 to win it for the Knicks. As of now, the two teams have not faced each other in the playoffs since. The Spurs versus the Nuggets. The Spurs-Nuggets rivalry actually goes back to the ABA, when the Spurs were led by George the Iceman Gervin, and the Nuggets were led by David Skywalker Thompson. When the two teams came to the NBA, Gervin and Thompson had the most legendary battle for a scoring title ever. In the last game of the 1978 regular season, Thompson scored a historic 73 points. You'd think that would be enough to secure the title, but then Gervin went on to score 63 points, which won him the 1978 scoring title. But the first NBA Spurs and Nuggets playoff matchup would be a series where Thompson was no longer leading the Nuggets, the 1983 West semis. Rather, the new face of Denver was Alex English. The Nuggets were the 3rd highest rated offensive team that season, while the Spurs were the 2nd. So, as suspected, there was a lot of scoring. In Game 1, the Spurs scored 152 points, while the Nuggets scored 133. But the Spurs proved that if you have 2 great offensive teams, the better defensive team will ultimately prevail, which is why the Nuggets were defeated in 5 games. I should also mention the regular season game between the Spurs and Nuggets on January 11th, 1984, when the Nuggets beat the Spurs 163-155, one of the highest scoring games of all time. The 80s Nuggets are pretty famous for being great offensively, but not as great defensively, which is why in the 84 offseason, they acquired Fat Lever, Calvin Nat, and Wayne Cooper to become a little better defensively, and it paid off. In the 1985 first round, the Nuggets defeated the Spurs 3-2. The final Alex English Nuggets v Spurs series came in the 1990 first round, where the Spurs, now led by David Robinson, swept the Nuggets in 3 games. In 1995, the Nuggets had rebuilt themselves with Cookie Monster Dikembe Mutombo at center, and had even pulled off one of the greatest playoff upsets the previous year. But in the 1995 first round against the Spurs, they were again swept in 3 games. Now we jump up a decade to the 2000s. In the 2005 first round, the Nuggets faced off against the eventual champion Spurs, and the famous trio of Duncan, Ginobili, and Parker dismantled them in 5 games. In 2007, the Nuggets acquired Allen Iverson midway through the season, and their very own Marcus Camby was that season's Defensive Player of the Year, but again, in the first round, they were defeated by the Spurs in 5 games. The last time these teams met up was in the 2019 first round. Thanks to Jokic's near triple-double average, the Nuggets won the series in 7 games, earning them only their 2nd series win against the Spurs. The Celtics versus the Rockets. Originally located in San Diego, the Rockets moved to Houston in 1972 and became an Eastern Conference team in 1973. The Rockets defeated the Knicks in the 1975 East first round and advanced to the East semis, where their opponent were the defending champion Celtics. Despite good individual performances from Murphy and Rudy T, the Celtics core of Havlicek, Cowens, JoJo White, Don Chaney, Paul Silas, and Don Nelson defeated the Rockets in 5 games. I also have to mention one of my favorite random stories in NBA history. In a regular season game on February 25th, 1976, Rockets guard Mike Newland flopped on Dave Cowens, which resulted in Cowens getting a foul called on him. A few seconds later, Newland was running down the court, and Cowens decked him to the ground with both of his elbows, and then screamed right in the face of a ref, "Now that's a foul!" The two teams' second playoff matchup happened in 1980, when the Rockets were now being led by Moses Malone, and the Celtics were now being led by a rookie Larry Bird. Some don't know that the first regular season game Bird ever played was against the Houston Rockets, and the Celtics won 114-106. The Celtics swept the Rockets in the 1980 East semis, but the following season, the Rockets were moved out of the Eastern Conference and into the West. They ended up making the 1981 finals, but lost to the Celtics in 6 games. By 1986, the Rockets were now being led by the Twin Tower duo of Hakeem Olajuwon and Ralph Sampson. Like in 1981, they went on an underdog run where they upset the Lakers and earned another appearance against the Celtics in the NBA Finals. They held their own pretty well, considering this was the '86 Celtics, but the Rockets still lost the series in 6 games. I also have to mention the brawl that broke out between Sampson and Jerry Sichting in Game 5, and the effigy Boston fans made for Sampson in Game 6 back in Boston Garden. The two teams have not matched up in the playoffs since, so, in the words of Green Day, there's no return from '86. The SuperSonics versus the Lakers. A lot of SuperSonics history is becoming forgotten by modern fans, which is a real shame, because they've been a part of some pretty great moments throughout NBA history. By the late 70s, the Sonics were becoming one of the strongest teams in the NBA, thanks to the trio of Gus Williams, Dennis Johnson, and Jack Sikma. At the same time, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was having some of his best individual years on the Lakers, but it wasn't resulting in much playoff success. The Sonics actually started the 77-78 season with a 5-17 record, but after hiring Lenny Wilkens as their head coach, they quickly began to turn things around. The Sonics defeated the Lakers 2-1 in the 1978 first round, but lost in the finals that same year. In the 1979 West semis, the Sonics defeated the Lakers in 5 games, and this time, they were able to win the championship in that year's finals. 1980 would be an even more successful regular season for the Sonics, as they won 56 games, a franchise best up to that point. They defeated the Trailblazers and the Bucks in the playoffs, and their opponent in the West finals were the Lakers. Although this year, the Lakers had gotten a shot of adrenaline to the heart. With the addition of rookie Magic Johnson, Kareem was just too much for the Sonics, and the Lakers won the series in 5 games. 1980 would be the last stand for this particular Sonics squad, as Dennis Johnson was traded in the offseason, and Gus Williams sat out the entire 1981 season because of a contract dispute. By 1987, the Sonics had rebuilt themselves with a trio of Tom Chambers, Xavier McDaniel, and Dale Ellis. They managed to make the West Finals, but ran into the Showtime Lakers. McDaniel had a great 42-point performance in Game 3, but the Sonics were swept in 4 games. Their final matchup against the Showtime Lakers came in 1989, and like last time, they were swept in 4 games. By 1995, the exciting 1-2 punch of Gary Payton and Shawn Kemp were in full control of the Sonics. The team was establishing itself as one of the rising stars in the 90s West, but they had a bit of a reputation for falling short in the playoffs, like when they went 57-25 in the 1995 regular season and were defeated 3-1 by the 48-win Lakers in the first round. 1998 marked the final time either team faced each other in the playoffs. Even though they no longer had Shawn Kemp, the Sonics still powered their way to a 61-win season, and so had the Lakers. The Lakers defeated the Sonics 4-1 in the 98 West semis. The Suns versus the Warriors. The Suns and Warriors first played each other in the 1976 West Finals. This was the ultimate underdog matchup, as the previous year, the Warriors had pulled off what many consider to be the greatest upset in finals history, and in 1976, the Suns were returning to the playoffs for the first time since 1970. This is a really great playoff series that went to 7 games, but it's often only remembered for the final Game 7. In the first quarter, Rick Barry got into a fight with the Suns' Ricky Sobers. When halftime came around, Barry saw playback footage of none of his teammates helping him during the fight. The famous story is that Rick Barry refused to shoot in the second half of Game 7 because he was mad at his teammates, which resulted in the Suns winning the game and the series. Barry himself denies this rumor, and honestly, I'm not 100% sure about it either. It is true that Barry only took 19 shots in Game 7, even though he was averaging 24.5 shots over the first 6 games, but people hardly talk about the mistakes the Warriors made in Games 4 and 6. In Game 4, Warriors player Derek Dickey missed one of 2 free throws in the final seconds, which allowed Keith Erickson to hit a buzzer beater to send the game into overtime. The Suns eventually won that game, 133-129. In Game 6, the Suns had a 105-104 lead. With 5 seconds left in the game, the Warriors' Phil Smith drove to the basket, but was forced to pass the ball out. At that point, he had 3 options. He could pass it to Barry, who had an 18-foot open straightaway shot. He could pass it to Dwight Davis from 10 feet on the left block, or he could pass it to Jamal Wilkes from 20 feet in the right corner. Well, Smith passed it to Wilkes, who was then blocked by Gar Hurd. The second Suns vs. Warriors series came in the 1989 West Semis. The Suns had a very successful season, having acquired Tom Chambers in free agency, and their young Kevin Johnson was blossoming into a star. The Warriors were one letter T removed from the Run TMC phase, so I guess they were the Run MC Warriors. The Suns beat them in a comfortable 5 games. In 1993, the Warriors had acquired the rights to the #1 overall selected Chris Webber. In a game on November 13, 1993, Webber performed an iconic behind-the-back dunk on Charles Barkley. The Warriors and Suns later faced off that same season in the 1994 first round, but the series was never really close, as Tim Hardaway was injured and Barkley posted a career-high 56 points in Game 3 to sweep the Warriors out of the playoffs. So, what do you think is the most underrated rivalry in NBA history? Let me know in the comments, and take care.